So it's true, she whispered through tears. All this time, you've been keeping her. Because she's your real woman. I only happened to stumble upon you kissing that day. I'm nothing but a pawn. Lionel flinched as if struck, desperation pulling him forward. His words tumbled out, raw, hoarse, unguarded. No, Amara, don't say that. I paid to silence Hale, not to pay for her debts as her man. Hale threatened your mother's honor, forged letters that would have destroyed her memory. Clarissa was the go-between, nothing more. But the tears in her eyes hardened into fire. She turned from him, her voice rising sharp, torn between sob and steel. I've heard enough lies. I saw you with her lips on yours. Don't tell me this was sacrifice, it was indulgence. And I will not be your shield while you use me to mask your real love. Lionel reached for her, his own mask breaking, grief carving lines into his face. You are the only one I have ever loved. Every coin, every scheme, it was for you. Amara tore free, the sob in her throat finally breaking loose, her words cutting with finality. Then your proof came too late. I will never believe a man whose lips were already hers. The ledger slammed shut, the sound echoing like judgment. In the candlelight, her tear-streaked face froze in defiance, the portrait of a woman who had chosen pride over pain. Was this betrayal, or the cruelest lie ever staged?
The chandeliers blazed high above, a constellation of gold and crystal that bathed the ballroom in shimmering light. Jasmine threaded the air, thick and sweet, mingling with the beeswax polish of the gleaming marble floor. From the gallery, the musicians rehearsed a delicate prelude, each note swelling like the quickened beat of Amara Vale's heart. Everything was ready. Every garland, every gilded goblet, every seat card placed by her hand. She had built this evening with meticulous devotion, 1,000 tiny decisions spun into one flawless tapestry. Yet as she walked the polished floor, checking the arrangements one last time, her hands betrayed her. They trembled faintly against the silk of her gown, nerves slipping past her practiced composure. Clarissa is the beauty, a voice whispered from behind a fan, soft enough to be cruel. Yes, came the reply. But Amara is the Duchess in practice. The Duke knows which cousin will keep his house in order. Amara's throat tightened, but her smile never faltered. She had heard such comparisons her entire life. Clarissa Vale, her cousin, was a flame no man could resist watching. Amara was the shadow who tidied the aftermath. But tonight would end that. Tonight Lionel Ashbourne, Duke of Greythorne, would declare before the world that she was his future. The Dowager Duchess approached then, leaning heavily on her cane. "Rain threatens," she declared briskly. "Move the receiving line inside. The vestibule will serve." A flicker of panic threatened Amara's hard-won calm. The vestibule was too narrow, less grand than the courtyard she had prepared, but she inclined her head smoothly. "At once, Your Grace." Within minutes, under her clear instructions, footmen carried garlands and servants shifted tables. The vestibule transformed. When the Dowager surveyed the scene again, she offered a single approving nod. Amara exhaled, proud of her swift victory. Perfection held. Then a young footman approached, bowing low, a folded letter in his hand. "From His Grace, my lady." Amara broke the seal and read, "Dearest Amara, I must see to certain matters before the guests arrive. I beg you not to be concerned. Allow me this private hour in my study, and I will come to you later with all my devotion. Ever yours, Lionel." Her lips curved. So like him, measured, deliberate, never reckless. A lesser man would have swept her into his arms before the first toast, but Lionel preferred order. He preferred dignity. And she loved him for it, even if she wished sometimes that he could be caught by passion. Still. A private time in the study. No disturbance. She traced the words again. Clarissa's mocking voice from years past echoed in her mind. "You and your Duke are as stiff as portraits. Do you never tease him, cousin? Do you never see if he bends?" A smile tugged at her lips. Perhaps tonight she would. She folded the letter and slipped it into her bodice. If he meant to have quiet, she would give him anything but. She would walk in, laugh at his solemn warning, and make him admit he could not keep her out. The thought of his startled expression delighted her. Gathering her skirts, Amara slipped into the side corridor, away from the candlelight and chatter of the hall. The portraits of long-dead dukes glowered down from the walls as she passed, her slippers whispering against the carpet. Her pulse raced faster with each step, anticipation fizzing in her blood. At the study door, she paused, lifting her hand to knock, but mischief won. She pushed the handle and entered, ready with a playful rebuke. The fire crackled low in the grate. A glass lay forgotten on the desk, and before it, her world shattered. Clarissa stood against Lionel, her hands fisted in his cravat, her golden head tilted, her mouth pressed against his. A wineglass slipped from Clarissa's grasp and broke against the hearth with a sharp, cruel sound. Amara froze. Her mind refused to make sense of what her eyes delivered. Clarissa, her cousin, her rival, kissed the man who had written her only minutes before, promising devotion. Lionel's hands hovered, as though caught mid-motion, his face stricken, pale. But Clarissa's eyes opened for the briefest instant, locking on Amara's. Triumph glittered there before she feigned shock. The note in Amara's bodice seared her skin. He had told her not to disturb him. Had he known she would disobey? Had Clarissa known? The thought twisted like a knife. Perhaps it was all a careful design, to keep her away while he surrendered elsewhere. Her heart roared. The room tilted. She reached for the ribbon tied at her wrist, the ivory mark of her engagement, and tore it free. The silk snapped, falling like dead weight onto the carpet. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady, though her soul cracked with it. End it. Lionel's head jerked, his mouth opening, but she would not hear him. Clarissa gasped dramatically, as though the victim, but Amara did not turn. She walked from the study, each step sharp and swift. The portraits seemed to lean after her, pity etched in their painted eyes. Somewhere behind her, the fire hissed, the shards of glass cooling on the hearth. The ballroom glittered ahead, still perfect, still waiting. But Amara carried ruin in her chest. The man she had chosen, the cousin she had trusted least, together they had destroyed everything she had built. And the whispers she had fought to silence would now scream her humiliation through every corner of the court. If you were Amara, would you confront them or end it on the spot? Comment. Confront or end it. The withdrawing room was warm with firelight, but Amara felt cold down to her marrow. She sat rigid on the damask sofa, fingers knotted tight in her lap, the ivory ribbon she had torn from her wrist lying in tatters beside her, like the corpse of something sacred. Outside, rain hissed against the high windows, tapping in time with her frantic pulse. Servants tiptoed past the doorway, their silence heavy with what they had already guessed. Her world had cracked in a single moment, but the fault line had been laid years before. When her mother died, she was 12, too young to bury grief properly, too old to ignore it. That day she learned that chaos destroyed homes. Her father, lost to sorrow, forgot the accounts and the estate affairs. Debts nearly swallowed them whole until Amara stepped forward. At 13 she learned to keep ledgers, to soothe creditors, to smile politely at neighbours who whispered that a motherless girl could not hold a house together. Planning became her armour, precision her shield. If everything was in place, no one could see the cracks. Tonight, for the first time, she had believed she would be rewarded for all those years of careful perfection. Instead, she had seen her cousin's mouth pressed to the man who was supposed to be hers. The door creaked. She looked up, pulse stuttering. Lionel stood there, rain darkening his shoulders where he had come in from the storm. His face was as pale as the marble floors. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he stepped forward. Amara, he began, his voice low, raw. What you saw? Her laugh broke sharp as glass. What I saw? Lionel. I saw your lips on hers. His jaw clenched. He looked older than she had ever seen him, stripped of his usual iron composure. She came to me. I pushed her away. By God, I did not invite it. Her mind burned with the memory. Clarissa's perfume filling the air, her hand gripping his cravat, his face turned. But had his lips not touched hers? Had she imagined his stillness as horror rather than surrender? Her chest squeezed with a fury that was half agony, half doubt. Lionel's eyes shadowed as he spoke again, more urgent now. She cornered me, Amara. I swear it. I meant to... He stopped, his gaze faltering as though words could not reach far enough to bridge the wound. His horror had been real. She had seen it when her silhouette filled the doorway. But it came too late, too shallow, against the image carved into her heart. Her silence was answer enough. She rose, turned her face away, and walked past him without another word. He let her go. Later that night, Amara sat alone in her chambers, the storm lashing against the windows, when the door eased open. Clarissa slipped inside, her eyes already rimmed red, a handkerchief clutched between her fingers. Amara, she whispered, her voice breaking. I could not sleep without speaking to you. I feel so wretched. Amara's stomach tightened. You should. Clarissa lowered herself into a chair across from her, trembling hands pressed to her face. You must believe me, I never wanted this. Lionel invited me. He said he wanted to ask about a book I'd been reading. I thought nothing of it, but when I came, he changed. He drew closer, Her voice faltered, dissolving into sobs. He tried to have some intimate moment with me. I pushed him away, but he forced himself closer. It was only when you entered that he stopped. Amara's heart lurched, bile rising at the words. You lie. I wish I did, Clarissa whispered, lowering the handkerchief just enough to let Amara see the sheen of tears on her cheeks. He loves you. I know that. But he cannot keep his eyes from wandering. He likes women, Amara, more than he should. And he hides that part from you. He pretends to be dutiful, but he is not. I felt so ashamed, as though he wanted to take advantage of me. Amara's hands tightened on the arm of her chair. She wanted to scream that her cousin was spinning a cruel fiction, but the image of Lionel's stillness, his lips pressed to Clarissa's, was still carved into her sight. The doubt Clarissa planted slid in like poison, twisting deeper. Clarissa reached forward, catching her hand with a desperate clutch. Please do not marry such a man. You deserve a husband who looks only at you, not one who cannot restrain himself. I would never forgive myself if I stayed silent. Her voice cracked, her shoulders trembling as though the weight of confession had broken her. Amara's chest heaved. Words failed her. All she could do was sit, her cousin's false tears blurring before her eyes as suspicion and heartbreak tangled in her veins until she could no longer tell where truth ended and lies began. Somewhere beyond the withdrawing room, a servant carried a bundle of papers through the hall. One slipped loose onto a table nearby, its bold headline draft catching Amara's eye. Perfect engagement, imperfect duke. The ink was fresh, the letters brash. It was Clarissa's plans. She's already spoken her lies to some ears that the Duke wants to take advantage of her. Mrs. Cleary, the pamphleteer who recorded every scandal of the season, was already sharpening her quill on their ruin. Amara felt sick. In a matter of hours, the whispers would not only belong to the court. They would spread to the city streets, the coffee houses, the parlours of every noble who had envied her rise. Lionel stepped closer, his voice taut. Amara, please, grant me a word alone. I beg you. Her head lifted, her heart tearing itself in two. Alone with him, he might convince her. Alone with him, she might crumble. And then what? To return to him, after the image of Clarissa's lips still burned in her eyes. To risk being thought a fool, forgiving too quickly. Her voice came out quiet but hard as stone. Not tonight. Not ever. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lionel flinched as though she had struck him, but she did not move. Clarissa bowed her head, her shoulders quivering in the mimicry of grief, but Amara saw the corner of her cousin's mouth twitch. The door opened again. The Dowager Duchess entered, cane tapping sharply. Her gaze swept over the room, the torn ribbon at Amara's side, Lionel's pallor, Clarissa's staged collapse, and her mouth tightened. "The engagement," she said coldly, "is postponed." A ripple of gasps swept through the chamber as attendants gathered behind her. The word postponed carried the weight of broken. The Duke of Greythorn left standing without a bride, the Vale family stripped of triumph, and Clarissa— Clarissa's lips curved, small and sly, almost invisible, but not to Amara. For in that secret smile lay the truth. Clarissa had won the first move, and Amara, her hands trembling in her lap, knew her cousin would not stop until everything she loved was ash and whispers. The storm had broken in the night, leaving the air sharp and rinsed clean, but Amara felt none of the freshness as she stepped into the chapel courtyard the next morning. The bells tolled, their iron voices carrying over the roofs of the estate, summoning not to celebration but to witness. The vast Ashbourne estate, sprawling as a small town, was never silent. Its galleries, gardens and drawing rooms were always filled with relatives, prominent guests, and influential allies who lived there as though it were a city within walls. Now they spilled into the courtyard, whispering, eager for spectacle. The estate society thrived on gossip, and Amara was about to feed them. She walked to the centre of the courtyard, her pale gown fluttering in the brisk wind, her chin lifted with defiance. Every step was measured, every movement steady, though her heart felt like glass cracking inside her chest. She would not let it show. Her family's name was hers to protect, even if her heart had already been broken. The crowd pressed closer, nobles in fine cloaks, cousins with eager eyes, guests who had arrived for the engagement only to find themselves in the middle of scandal. Their presence was suffocating, but Amara knew she must face them. Lionel stood at the edge of the gathering, his face unreadable, a streak of weariness beneath his proud features. His eyes sought hers, but she refused the connection. When she spoke, her voice carried across the courtyard, cool and unyielding. "The engagement between myself and His Grace, the Duke of Greythorn, is dissolved." Gasps rippled through the estate society. Servants faltered, whispers rose, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Amara's hands trembled inside her sleeves, but her voice did not waver. "This house may keep its jewels, its titles, and its promises. I will not keep a lie." Lionel stepped forward at once, his restraint a mask over the desperation in his eyes. "Amara." His voice was calm, controlled, but the undercurrent of pain was clear. "I was not the seeker in that room. You must believe me." His words, so carefully measured, struck her like ice. No fire, no rage, no desperation, only restraint. To the estate society, it sounded cold, almost indifferent. To Amara, it felt like confirmation. Her chin lifted higher. "Believe? When my own eyes betray me." A silence stretched between them, taut and unbearable. Lionel's fists clenched, his breath misting in the chill morning. But he said no more. His restraint, meant to be dignity, became his condemnation. Later, in the rose garden, Clarissa found her. Amara had sought solitude, but her cousin arrived like shadow to flame, her shawl wrapped tightly as though she too bore sorrow. Her eyes were swollen from practiced tears, her lips trembling just enough to be convincing. "Amara," Clarissa whispered, lowering herself onto the bench beside her cousin. Amara's heart gave a savage twist, her stomach churning. Clarissa leaned closer, lowering her voice to a trembling confession. "He loves you, I know that, but he cannot help himself. He likes women too much. He cannot look only at you. I felt ashamed, Amara, that he would try to take advantage of me." You deserve better than such a man. The words poisoned her veins. Amara wanted to scream, to strike, to call her cousin a liar, but Lionel's stillness in that cursed moment returned to her. The unmoving figure, the lips that had touched Clarissa's. Doubt gnawed at her. Clarissa pressed the knife deeper, her tears falling like perfect pearls. Do not marry him, cousin. It will ruin you. He is not what he pretends to be. Amara pulled her hand free, standing abruptly. Enough! Her voice cracked, but she steeled it. I will not hear more. Clarissa bowed her head, covering her mouth as though stricken, but as Amara stormed away, she missed the flicker of triumph in her cousin's eyes. Elsewhere in the study, Mr. Hale waited for Clarissa with the patience of a viper. His black-gloved hand tapped against the desk as she entered. The debts, my lady, he reminded her, his voice oily with menace. You pay them, or the story leaves these walls and finds its way to print. That you deliberately seduced the Duke? The estate society is already buzzing. Imagine the city. Clarissa paled, her composure cracking for a heartbeat. I will find the coin. You will find it soon, Hale warned, leaning close enough that his foul breath grazed her cheek. Or I will find my way to Mrs. Cleary. Clarissa swallowed her terror, nodded, and fled the room. But already the truth was out of her hands. By dusk, the presses had begun to turn. In the city, Mrs. Cleary's pamphlets were distributed to eager readers, the ink still wet, the scandal still fresh. The unmaking of perfection, the headline proclaimed in bold strokes. Beneath it, the tale spun, a duke's wandering eyes, a cousin's embrace, a bride-to-be humiliated before the estate society. Copies reached the estate before the lamps were lit. Guests gathered in salons and withdrawing rooms, holding the pamphlets aloft, their whispers rising into gleeful murmurs. The estate society thrived on such ruin. Where once they had come to celebrate, they now lingered to dissect, to gossip, to see who would fall. And Amara, standing at the window of her chambers, stared into the storm-darkening gardens. Her decision had been made. To protect her name, her family, and what little pride she had left, she had cut Lionel off completely. Her heart throbbed with fury, but her face remained steel. If perfection could be unmade in an instant, then she would fashion herself from iron instead. The days that followed the scandal dragged like slow fire. Rain-washed mornings gave way to brittle afternoons where the estate society swarmed closer, feeding on every scrap of rumour, every sideways glance between Amara and Lionel. And yet, for all her determination to cut him from her life, threads kept pulling them together, weaving proximity she could neither escape nor entirely deny. It was Mr. Braxley, the estate's steward, who inadvertently revealed one such thread. He had come to Lionel with a stack of ledgers. Suppliers unpaid, deliveries delayed, not to the ducal household, but to a modest charity hospital in the city. The Duke frowned, recognising Amara's hand in the careful but overstrained accounts. He remembered her speaking once, too briefly, of her mother's illness, of the poor who had no one to care for them. She had carried that burden quietly, without calling attention to her work. Braxley cleared his throat. If we do not send funds, the hospital cannot purchase linen for beds this month. Her ladyship... He hesitated. She has already pledged her own allowance. Lionel's chest tightened. Amara, who never spoke of herself unless forced, who carried herself with unyielding pride, had bled her own fortune to keep the sick in comfort. Without a word, Lionel signed his own name to cover the shortage, ordering the funds sent at once, but demanded it be done anonymously. He would not wound her further by letting her believe it was charity. Still, a part of him yearned for her to know, that he saw her, that he admired her. The next morning, Amara went herself to the hospital, as she often did in secret. The children greeted her with eager cries, tugging at her skirts. She bent to straighten bandages, to pour broth, to kiss a fevered brow. And there he was. Lionel, tall against the dim corridor, speaking softly to a boy who clung to his coat. The child laughed, a fragile sound, as Lionel swung him gently in his arms. The Duke's smile, unseen by most, was tender, unguarded, a warmth Amara had never known from him. It struck her like a blow. She turned sharply away, fury rising not at him but at herself for the way her chest softened. She had sworn she would not be moved. She clenched her hands until the moment passed, until pride steadied her. But fate, or Clarissa's hand, refused to give her peace. At the promenade 2 days later, among the manicured paths and chattering noblewomen, Amara found herself cornered by sight. Across the gravel walk, Lionel sat with Clarissa on a stone bench. Clarissa leaned close, whispering with the intimacy of a lover, her hand resting far too easily against his sleeve. She looked up at him with eyes that glistened for effect, and when she caught Amara watching, her smile curved sharp as a blade. The whispers spread quickly. Perhaps the Duke chose the wrong cousin. They look well together, don't they? Some bonds cannot be undone. Amara held her head high, ignoring the molten ache in her throat. She would not give Clarissa the satisfaction of reaction, but the poison of sight lodged deep, festering. The next day, the poison took sharper shape. A maidservant approached her in the drawing room, pale and nervous. "My lady, I found this in Miss Clarissa's reticule." She handed over a silk handkerchief, fine, edged in lace. Embroidered in the corner, L.A. Lionel Ashbourne. Amara's stomach dropped. She turned it over in her hand, fingers tightening. Clarissa's triumph paraded now as possession. Whether planted or true, it served its purpose, another nail in the coffin of Amara's trust. That evening, the Dowager Duchess called her privately to her chambers. The old woman sat by the fire, her cane resting at her side, her sharp eyes fixed upon Amara. "My child," she said, her voice heavy with years of watching scandals rise and fall. "Courage is not the absence of scandal. It is the presence of truth when one is watched." Amara bowed her head. "But what if the truth itself is uncertain?" The dowager's gaze pierced her. "Then you must decide which truth you will live with. The world will always whisper. The only voice that matters is the one you can bear in your own heart." The words lingered, offering no comfort but forcing Amara to confront the war within her. Days later, at a musicale arranged in the Ashbourne music room, the estate society gathered again, ever eager for entertainment, both musical and scandalous. The chandeliers burned low, violins wept, and the pianoforte filled the chamber with trembling notes. Amara was coaxed into a duet, her voice steady, her presence luminous despite the shadows upon her name. Lionel joined her at the pianoforte, his hands guiding the melody. Their eyes met once, just once, and the music shifted, deepened, as if their hearts remembered what their minds denied. When the song ended, applause swelled. Amara rose, but her glove caught on the edge of the music stand, tearing with a sharp rip. The silk parted, leaving her bare hand exposed. She faltered. Then Lionel's hand was there, steadying hers. The touch seared. Heat travelled from his skin into hers, shocking her into awareness. For one fragile instant she wanted nothing more than to lean into him, to remember tenderness instead of betrayal. But pride struck her harder. She snatched her hand back as if burned, her face pale, her eyes fierce. "Do not touch me," she whispered, her voice meant only for him. This time she did not stop. Her words spilled, raw and trembling. "I saw you with her, Lionel, with my cousin. And despite everything, despite the conflict between us now, you are still close to her. You claim she seduced you and you let her seduce you again. She came with her practiced words, and still you did not send her away. How am I meant to believe you?" Lionel's breath caught. "Amara, you do not know. She came to me, not the other way. She twisted what you saw. I was trying to push her away. By God I was, but you entered before I could be rid of her." Do you truly believe I would betray you for her? Her heart wavered, torn between the fire in his eyes and the memory of Clarissa's lips on his. Confusion strangled her, the uncertainty cutting deeper than rage. I do not know what to believe, she whispered, her voice breaking as she turned from him. His hand fell to his side, his jaw locked in agony, but he said nothing. The moment broke. Music resumed, laughter swelled. Clarissa swept into the room with a brilliance that demanded attention. She clutched her reticule, empty now of the handkerchief, and allowed a knowing smile to play upon her lips as she curtsied to the assembly. And then, in a voice pitched just loud enough for the estate society to hear, she hinted her next move. It seems an announcement is soon to be made. Some engagements are unmade. Her eyes flicked to Amara, then to Lionel. And some engagements are soon to begin anew. Gasps echoed through the room. The implication was clear. Clarissa meant to stake her claim on Lionel. Amara's breath caught, fury and dread knotting in her chest. The estate society leaned in, hungry for the next chapter of ruin. The storm that had hung heavy for days finally broke in earnest, lashing the great windows of Ashbourne House with sheets of rain. Lightning cracked above the chimneys, thunder rolled through the estate grounds, and inside the walls, whispers struck harder still. Amara walked the long corridor alone, her skirts brushing the floor like restless sighs, her mind aflame with the memory of Clarissa's taunt in the music room. The estate society feasted on every look, every gesture, and though Amara's spine held straight, her heart faltered beneath the endless scrutiny. It was then that Mr. Braxley, the steward, requested her presence. She followed him into his office, a room smelling of ink, damp vellum, and the faint tang of candle smoke. Stacks of ledgers towered on the desk, each bound in leather, each marked with the Duke's seal. "My lady," Braxley began, bowing awkwardly, "there is something I must bring to light. It may be unwelcome." Amara's pulse quickened, though her face betrayed nothing. "Speak plainly." He slid a ledger forward, the pages already opened. "These accounts. For the last several months, the Duke has made regular payments, large sums, to cover Miss Clarissa's debts." Amara's eyes fell to the neat figures, the names of creditors, the sums in bold ink. Her breath caught like glass in her throat. Clarissa's debts? Yes, my lady. Gambling debts, dressmakers' accounts, even coin lost to a Mr. Hale in games at cards, all covered discreetly, by his grace. The room seemed to tilt. Heat pricked her skin, shame and fury mingling until she could scarcely stand. Of course, it explained Clarissa's daring, her smugness. Lionel had been paying her cousin's way in secret, keeping her close with coin, perhaps with more. Her chest burned as though her ribs had turned to flame. "So it is true," she whispered. "He supports her. They are in a relationship and keeping it away from me. Maybe I'm the one being used by the both of them." Braxley looked uneasy, shifting under her gaze. "I thought it my duty to show you, my lady. For your protection." Amara turned away, her nails biting into her palms. The accounts screamed betrayal in cold numbers and ink. The hospital, the children, her sleepless nights over ledgers. Meanwhile, Lionel's wealth flowed freely to Clarissa's vices. Her cousin's lies had been poison, but this was worse. Confirmation. She fled the office, her steps quick over the stone floor, tears stinging her eyes though she would not let them fall. In the quiet corridor beyond, a shadow emerged. She had requested to see him. Lionel, tall and pale, his expression grave as thunder. Immediately she threw the question, "Who is Clarissa really to you? Why pay her debt?" "Amara," he said, voice strained. "Please, hear me." Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "I have heard enough. I have seen the accounts, Lionel. Months of coin poured into her hands. Do not insult me further with denials." For a moment he flinched as though struck. Then he stepped closer, desperation crackling in his voice. "Yes, I paid her debts. But not for her sake, for yours. Her laugh broke sharp, bitter. Do not twist this into gallantry. I swear it on my honour. His voice rose, raw, stripped of his usual restraint. Mr. Hale came to me months ago threatening to release forged letters he claimed were written by your late mother, letters of disgrace, of impropriety. All lies, Amara, but powerful lies. Lies that would have destroyed her name. And yours. She froze, her chest hollowing. I sought to buy them back, Lionel continued. Rain thundered against the windows, drowning all but his voice. But Hale demanded payment through Clarissa. I do not know why. Perhaps she convinced him it must pass her hands. Perhaps she meant to weave her snare. I agreed only to spare you the pain of seeing your mother slandered. Her lips parted, her pulse a roar. Could it be true? Had every coin been for her? Not her cousin? Yet Clarissa's tears, Clarissa's whispers, Clarissa's hand on Lionel's sleeve all surged back, clawing at her reason. You expect me to believe you endangered your own honour, poured gold into her hands only to keep my mother's ghost unsullied. Yes, Lionel said simply, his voice breaking on the word. I would risk anything for you. Her heart wavered, unsteady, but pride flared to shield her pain. She turned from him, whispering, I do not know what to believe anymore. The corridor darkened as lightning flashed outside, shadows leaping across the stone walls. And then a maid came running, breathless, her cap askew. She dropped into a curtsy, eyes darting nervously. My lady. She glanced between Amara and Lionel before blurting the truth. It was Miss Clarissa who sent you to the study that night. She gave me the note, told me to deliver it at that very hour, said you must not delay. Amara's body went rigid, her breath halting. Lionel's eyes closed briefly, as though in both vindication and grief. The maid lowered her gaze. I thought nothing of it then, but now I could not keep silent. With those words she fled, leaving only the storm's roar behind. Amara stood frozen, every piece of the puzzle turning in her mind. Clarissa's precision, the staged kiss, the handkerchief planted, the debts funneled. A pattern emerged, terrible and undeniable. Her cousin had orchestrated it all. And yet, though truth knocked at her door, her heart remained barred. The image of Lionel's lips near Clarissa's still burned, and pride clung tight to her wounds. Her voice shook as she whispered, Even if you speak truth, Lionel, the hurt remains. I cannot untangle myself from it. He reached for her then, his hand stopping just short of hers, his voice low and pleading. I ask for nothing but time to prove myself to you. She stepped back, her breath unsteady, her eyes clouded with confusion and fear. She could not forgive, not yet. That night, as the storm raged, pamphlets arrived fresh from Mrs. Cleary's press. The Estate Society passed them hand to hand, hungry for the ink still damp, the scandal hot as fire. The headline blazed across the page, A New Engagement in Ashbourne House. Beneath it, a column of confident detail. The Duke's rumoured courtship of Miss Clarissa Vale, their promenade together, the handkerchief embroidered with his initials, whispers of secret meetings and debts. Details so precise, so intimate, they could only have come from someone inside the walls. By dawn, the Estate Society was alight with it. Guests gathered in parlours, voices sharp with speculation. Servants whispered in corners, nobles leaned close at breakfast tables. Clarissa, draped in silks, smiled like a queen awaiting coronation. And Amara, standing alone by her window as rain coursed down the glass, felt the weight of betrayal heavier than ever. Not because she believed it true, but because the world already did. The Grand Assembly was meant to celebrate the season's triumphs, yet for Amara it became the theatre of her undoing. Chandeliers blazed overhead, their countless flames reflected in gilt-framed mirrors, but the light felt cruel, exposing every weakness. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her gown heavy on her shoulders, her heart heavier still. The Estate Society clustered in whispers, their eyes glancing, their fans fluttering like restless wings. Then came the moment she dreaded. A matron, one of the estate's loudest tongues, leaned forward with a voice pitched for all to hear. "Lady Amara," she cooed, her smile sharp as glass. "Do you condone His Grace's new match with your cousin? We hear the announcement is soon." A hush rippled outward, every face turning to her. The weight of it pressed down until she could scarcely breathe. Words tangled on her tongue. She had not the strength to deny, nor the clarity to confess. So she stood silent, her gaze steady, her lips pressed into a thin line. Silence in a court of rumour was more damning than words. The crowd interpreted it instantly. Fans snapped shut, whispers hissed. She accepts it. How humiliating. She yields the field. Her silence became consent in their eyes, and with that, the ruin was sealed. Elsewhere, Lionel had cornered Clarissa in the echoing gallery, where portraits of stern ancestors loomed overhead. His voice, raw and stripped of patience, reverberated off the marble. "Enough, Clarissa. Enough lies. Enough poison. What game have you been playing?" Clarissa's lips curled in a smile as she trailed her fingers along a gilded frame. "Game? No, Lionel. Merely survival. You were useful. That is all." His jaw clenched, fury crackling in his voice. "Useful?" "Yes," she said sweetly, her eyes glinting. "A duke's attention is worth more than coin. Worth more than Amara's pitiful perfection. I gave society a spectacle, and you—" She let the pause linger, savouring his fury. "You gave me credibility. Now whether you marry me or not, the whispers are enough. I win." He stepped closer, his restraint thinning to a dangerous thread. "You will regret this, Clarissa." Her laugh echoed cold. "Perhaps, but you, Lionel, will regret it more." Mr. Hale, meanwhile, pressed his own claim. He caught Clarissa in the shadow of the stairwell, his hand snaring her wrist. His smile was oily, his words a venomous whisper. "By week's end, Clarissa, you pay me, or I sing the truth. I know more than you think. You know I know about that night at the study. I know what you planned, what you whispered to the maid, what you set in motion. If the world heard it in my words, you would be finished, entirely." Clarissa paled, then steadied herself with practised poise. "And if I cannot pay? Then I publish, and I make sure every noble eye knows it was your hand guiding the Duke's fall." He leaned closer, his breath foul. "You need me, Clarissa. Do not forget." Self-preservation flared in her eyes. By the next morning, Clarissa had struck first. She released a letter, doctored but convincing, implying Amara had written to a viscount, plotting to trade Lionel's engagement for a better title. The ink was smudged just enough to disguise the forgery, the words laced with phrases Amara might have written in desperation. Society seized upon it with glee. Ungrateful. Ambitious. A serpent in silk. The cruel voices rose until they drowned every defence. Worse still, the hospital donors, ever sensitive to scandal, withdrew their support. Amara's beloved charity faltered, beds stripped bare, medicines withheld. Her life's secret work unravelled under the shadow of disgrace. Alone in her chamber that night, Amara sat by candlelight. The storm outside rattled the panes, but within the silence pressed heavier. On the dressing table lay the ivory ribbon once tied around her wrist, now folded with aching care. She lifted it, her fingers trembling. "I chose safety," she whispered to the flame, her voice breaking, "and still lost everything." Tears pricked her eyes, spilling unbidden. She had clung to order, to dignity, to rules that should have protected her. Yet here she sat, branded guilty in silence, abandoned by allies, stripped of the life she had fought to build. She folded the ribbon into its box, sealing it away as though burying her own heart. Then came a knock, soft as hesitation. She looked up sharply, her breath caught. A servant entered, bowing low, eyes darting nervously. In his hands was a folded scrap of paper. "My lady," he murmured, "this was found amongst the steward's discarded papers. I thought you should see." He laid it on the table and withdrew swiftly, leaving her alone with the note. Amara unfolded it with shaking fingers. At once she knew, the note that had sent her to the study that fateful night. The ink smeared in the corner, a blot as distinct as a signature. Her breath froze. She had seen that blot before, on Clarissa's writing desk, where a careless hand left stains upon the blotter. Her cousin's mark, the proof she had prayed for, dreaded, needed, the lure that began her ruin, written in Clarissa's own hand. The candlelight flickered over her pale face, her eyes blazing with the truth. Who should Amara trust now, her own instincts or Lionel's word? Comment below. Trust yourself or trust Lionel. The night was restless with rain, though the storm had spent much of its fury. Amara sat alone in her chamber, the forged note spread upon the writing desk before her. Candlelight wavered over the ink, catching the stain in the corner, Clarissa's careless blot immortalized like a signature. Her fingers traced the lines, cold and trembling. She whispered into the silence, her voice breaking. "I wanted proof more than truth." The admission cracked something in her chest. For days she had clung to pride, to doubt, to silence that had turned against her. Now, with the truth in her hands, she could no longer pretend. She had demanded certainty, yet had ignored the man who swore to her again and again that his loyalty was hers. She had given Clarissa more power than Lionel. The garden below glistened in moonlight, wet and fragrant after the rain. She gathered her courage like a cloak and left her chamber, her slippers nearly silent upon the stairs. The night air cut cold against her skin, but her resolve carried her forward. She found him in the garden, walking alone by the yew hedges, his head bowed, his coat damp where drops fell from the leaves. When he saw her, his breath caught, his body stiffening as though bracing for another blow. "Amara," he said quietly. She held up the note. "The proof. She wrote it. She sent me to the study. I should have seen it sooner." Lionel's eyes flared, then softened with a pain that seemed carved from his very soul. He said nothing, only waited. "I do not offer forgiveness," Amara whispered, her voice unsteady. "Not yet. But I will offer this. Help me expose her. Help me unravel how she did it." For a heartbeat, silence pressed between them. Then Lionel stepped closer, his hand hovering just above hers before falling back. "You have my word," he said, his voice fierce. "We will bring her lies into the light. Together." They met in the steward's office again, the same room that had once betrayed her with its cold accounts. Now it became their battleground. Lionel and Amara sat across from each other, the ledgers and notes spread before them like weapons. "Clarissa needed more than lies," Lionel said grimly. "She needed accomplices. It was Mr. Braxley who provided the missing link." He cleared his throat, pale but resolute. "There was a footman, Clarissa's particular man. I've seen him more than once in Mr. Hale's company. He carried letters, delivered packages. I thought little of it at the time." Amara leaned forward, her heart thudding. "Then it was Hale who threatened her with exposure, and Clarissa who turned his scheme against us." "Exactly so," Braxley confirmed, tapping the desk with a finger. "Clarissa used her footman as the bridge. She wove both of you into her web, each deception feeding the next." Lionel's jaw tightened. "And she nearly succeeded in destroying everything." The Dowager Duchess entered then, leaning upon her cane, her expression sharper than steel. Without a word, she set a sealed parchment on the desk. "I have had this for some time," she said coolly. "It came from a maid who once served in this house, dismissed under suspicious circumstances. She was young, foolish, and refused to obey Clarissa's commands. Before she left me this affidavit, sworn before a parish clerk." Amara broke the seal with trembling fingers. The words inside were stark, plain, and damning. The maid attested to Clarissa's orders, Lure Amara, delay her, ensure she arrived at the study at precisely the right time. When she refused to lie further, she was dismissed. Tears blurred Amara's eyes. At last, the truth was not shadows and whispers. It was written, witnessed, undeniable. The dowager's gaze fell upon her. Courage, child, is not what the world thinks of you. It is what you decide to place in the world's sight. Amara closed the affidavit with shaking hands, then looked to Lionel. For the first time in weeks, her voice carried certainty. Then we will expose her, publicly, cleanly, even if it ruins us one day more. Lionel's eyes burned with something more than gratitude. It was resolve, and beneath it, love. Yes, he said, leaning close. We choose truth no matter the cost. The decision sealed, the dowager wasted no time. That very evening, invitations were penned and dispatched, the wax seals still warm when the couriers departed. They carried a single tantalizing line. Ashbourne House requests your presence for a betrothal clarification. By morning, the Estate Society buzzed with speculation. Clarissa, radiant with triumph, preened in her chambers as she imagined the gathering. To her mind, it could mean only one thing. Lionel would make her claim official. She would be the Duchess at last. She smiled at her reflection, a glass of champagne raised high, certain of her victory. The great hall of Ashbourne blazed with light, its towering chandeliers dripping with crystal fire. Rows of chairs had been drawn up before the dais, and the Estate Society, every noble, every gossip, every keen-eyed rival, sat in tense anticipation. Mrs. Cleary herself perched in the front row, quill already poised above her notebook, her hawk's gaze glittering with the hunger for history to unfold before her. Amara stood at the centre, her gown a deep shade of storm silver, her bearing straight as a blade. For the first time in weeks, her heart did not falter beneath the gaze of others. This was not a trial of her shame, it was the hour she reclaimed her name. She lifted the forged note, the ink-stained corner catching the candlelight. Her voice, clear and calm, carried through the cavernous chamber. This was the lure that brought me to the study, not of my own design, but written and placed by another. The blot of ink is unique to my cousin Clarissa's desk, where she left her careless mark on every sheet she touched. Murmurs rippled, fans stilled mid-wave. Amara set the note aside, then drew forth a ledger. Here, accounts of coin, diverted not to noble charity or household order, but into the hands of Mr. Hale, a man known to trade in lies, a man who threatened to ruin my late mother's honour. These sums were pressed through Clarissa's keeping, under her request, and turned to poison against me. A maid was ushered forward, hands trembling, yet her voice steady. I was the one asked to carry the message that night. Clarissa ordered me. When I refused to lie further, I was dismissed. I swear it now before all. The hall erupted in shocked gasps. Clarissa, seated with calculated elegance, grew pale but held her fan high, as if it could shield her from the flames of truth. Then Lionel stepped forward, tall and resolute, his voice slicing through the uproar. There is more. He laid his hand upon the ledger. Yes, I paid the debts, but not for the reason you were told. The money trail leads to Mr. Hale. He demanded payment, or he would release forged letters defaming Lady Amara's late mother. I agreed to protect her family name. Not once did I lay claim to Clarissa in affection. The crowd leaned forward, breath caught on the precipice of revelation. Clarissa's fan snapped shut with a crack. You lie! She shrieked, rising to her feet. Do you think them fools, Lionel? Do you think her virtue so untouchable? Yes, I staged the kiss. Yes, I sent her to the study. And yes, I gave Mrs. Cleary every story, every line, because it was mine to tell. Without me, you would all have believed her perfect. But I showed you she was not. The words spilled in a torrent, her mask torn away by her own fury. Gasps swept through the assembly. Dowager Duchess rose with imperious command. At her signal, Men in Ashbourne livery seized Mr. Hale, who had tried to slip toward the door. His protests rang hollow as he was dragged forward, his pockets spilling papers and coin. The dowager's voice cut like steel. "This man will answer to the magistrate. His blackmail ends this night." The society's mood turned in an instant. Once sharp with cruelty, the whispers shifted to admiration, to relief, to awe. Amara, long pressed beneath their gaze, now stood vindicated. Mrs. Cleary, quills scratching furiously, looked up with a gleam in her eye. "The restoration of a lady," she murmured, already shaping tomorrow's headline. Then silence fell again as Lionel turned, not to the crowd but to Amara. His eyes burned with earnest fire, his voice carrying to every ear, though it was meant for hers alone. "I will not claim you, Amara. Not as my shield, not as the balm to my mistakes. I ask you." He dropped to one knee, not in performance but in devotion. "Be not my defense, but my equal. Stand with me, not because the world demands it, but because you choose it." Amara's breath caught, tears shining in her eyes. She had fought so hard for safety, for pride, for survival. But here, in the blaze of truth, she found something she had not dared hope for: belief. "I say yes," she whispered, voice trembling with certainty. "Not to silence gossip, not to bind a wound, but because I believe." The hall erupted, not in scandal, but in thunderous applause. Nobles rose to their feet, hands clapping, voices cheering. The sound rolled like a tide, sweeping away the ashes of disgrace. Clarissa's face twisted, her triumph shattered. She turned, clutching her silks about her, and fled into the storm outside, her footsteps echoing down the marble hall. Rain lashed the windows as the doors slammed behind her, leaving her alone in the night. But within the hall, Amara and Lionel stood side by side, their hands clasped, their eyes unshaken. Not scandal, not ruin, applause. The first light of dawn streamed through the stained glass windows of the chapel at Ashbourne House, painting the stone floor in soft hues of rose and gold. The storm had passed, leaving the grounds washed clean, the garden paths still glistening with dew. Within, a hush lay over the pews. No crowds of nobles, no throngs of gossiping tongues, only a small gathering of those who mattered most. Amara walked down the narrow aisle, her gown simple but radiant, the ivory ribbon once folded away now wrapped carefully around her bouquet of white lilies. That ribbon had once symbolized safety, then loss. Now it bound her flowers as a vow of remembrance, proof that even when perfection had shattered, truth could still be carried forward. Lionel stood waiting, not in rigid pride but in quiet awe, his shoulders no longer weighed with secrets or shame. When he took her hand, he bent his head, not to perform, but to honour. The officiant spoke the words, but it was their own vows that carried the moment. "I cannot promise perfection," Amara said, her voice steady though her throat ached. "I cannot promise we will never falter, never wound each other in our pride. But I can promise truth. I can promise that I will not hide, nor turn from what is hard. I will stand beside you, not as shield nor ornament, but as partner." Lionel's eyes shone. He lifted her hand, pressing it to his lips. "I once thought my task as Duke was to protect, to silence, to shield. But you taught me courage is not silence, nor is it denial. Courage is truth spoken even when the world listens. And so I vow, no mask, no half-truths, no distance, only honesty, only love, only us." The words lingered in the still air like the last notes of a hymn. The officiant sealed the vows with quiet solemnity, and when Lionel kissed Amara, there was no eruption of applause, no scandalized gasps, only warmth. A sigh of peace from those gathered, a sense that something fractured had been made whole again. By mid-morning, another gathering filled the rooms of Ashbourne House, but this one bore no hint of glittering gowns or sharpened whispers. It was the board of the hospital Amara had poured her soul into, donors, trustees, and humble physicians who had feared ruin when her name fell to scandal. Amara met them in the library, the light falling golden across her face. "You withdrew once," she said, her tone calm but resolute. "And I do not fault caution, but know this. I have no desire to reign through appearances. If you will walk with me, you will walk with the truth. Mrs. Cleary herself has agreed to witness and publish our accounts quarterly. Not gossip, but facts. Not whispers, but transparency." Mrs. Cleary inclined her head, her notebook already open. "I admit I sharpened my pen at her expense," she said dryly. "But this I will write gladly. A new column, perhaps. Truths instead of scandals." One by one, the donors nodded, murmurs of approval softening into pledges of coin. The hospital would reopen, its linen beds restored, its medicine shelves filled once more. Amara's eyes burned with grateful tears she did not let fall. For the first time, she felt not merely defended, but believed. That afternoon, in the quiet of her chamber, the Dowager Duchess entered with her cane tapping softly against the floor. She carried a small box of carved oak, its surface etched with the Ashbourne crest. "Come, child," the Dowager said, her sharp gaze softened with rare tenderness. "I have seen many scandals, most end with ruin or exile. But you—" She pressed the box into Amara's hands. "You faced it with more courage than I have seen in half a century of estate society." Amara opened the box. Inside lay a signet ring, its metal gleaming, the crest engraved deep. "Courage, written plain," the Dowager said firmly. "It is yours now, not for what you endured, but for what you chose." Amara slipped the ring onto her finger, the weight both strange and steady. She bowed her head in reverence. That evening, as the sun bled into gold over the gardens, Amara and Lionel found themselves alone in the study. The day had been filled with restoration, with gratitude, with embraces from allies. But now, at last, it was only the two of them, husband and wife, partners by choice. Lionel leaned against the desk, watching her with eyes that no longer hid their devotion. "Amara," he said softly, "we have weathered scandal, lies and loss. Now I would ask, what do you want our first act as partners to be? Not as Duke and Duchess, not as figure and shield, but as us." She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the ledgers stacked neatly in the corner, the endless numbers that marked duty and burden. Then her eyes turned back to him, resolute. "3 widows in the village," she said. "They owe debts they cannot pay. Their sons will starve if we wait for committees. Let us erase those debts, quietly, without spectacle. Let their lives begin anew without chains." Lionel's heart swelled, pride and love twining until they were inseparable. He stepped forward, cupping her face in his hands. "So be it. Our first act, freedom, not fanfare." Amara smiled, leaning into his touch. For the first time, the future felt like a promise instead of a threat. A week later, the gardens of Ashbourne bloomed in riotous colour, roses spilling over trellises, lavender bending in the breeze. Guests were gone, scandals faded into history, and the estate breathed in peace. Amara and Lionel stepped into the open air, their hands intertwined. A small band played a gentle waltz beneath the linden trees. There were no columns to impress, no nobles to dazzle. Only sincerity. Only them. He drew her close, guiding her in the slow dance. Her head rested against his chest, her laughter soft as birdsong. They moved together, unhurried, as though the world had no eyes but their own. For once, estate society did not intrude. For once, there were no whispers, no schemes, no cruel gazes. Only the Duke of Ashbourne and his Duchess, swaying beneath the canopy of stars, their love no longer hidden, no longer tested, but whole. As the music faded, Amara lifted her gaze to Lionel's, her voice quiet yet certain. "Perfection had cracked," she whispered, and through it, the truth bloomed. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. What moment redeemed this love for you, the proof, the public stand, or the private vow? Comment below, proof, public stand, or private vow.